Welcome to the Elevate Your Brand podcast, where we help online coaches learn how to elevate their brand, become the experts in their industries so they can bring in more clients and create a life they want. I am your host, Chris Anderson. And if you want to make a difference in the lives of others, share this episode, go over to Apple Podcasts and follow us there to leave a positive rating and review. And together we can leave a bigger positive mark on the world. Today we have Scott, who's coming on the show, and Scott is, he's a lot of things. He's done a lot of good, but, one cool thing is he's a Christian entrepreneur. He's also the CEO of 8-Figure Focus, where they help coaches and consultants hit that 7-figure or 8-figure mark in revenue. And they've helped over 20,000 people. And besides that work that he does with individuals, he is also the go-to advisor for organizations like T-Mobile, American Express, and Harvard University on revenue growth. So Scott Ritzheimer, I hope I said that right. Awesome. Welcome to Elevate Your Brand today, man.
Thanks, Chris. I'm excited to be here. This will be a lot of fun.
Yeah, looking forward to it, and super excited just to learn from you myself, but everyone else should be excited as well. I guess to start, just high level, what got you into doing, scale architects and everything you're doing with consulting and helping business owners?
For those who are watching, I look like I'm about 22 years old. So there's like this cognitive dissonance that hits when I say my next sentence. But I've had the opportunity to help start and scale about 20,000 organizations. Been there at the beginning stages for an enormous number of businesses, nonprofits, churches, ministries, the whole gamut, for-profit world, nonprofit world. And so judging by that, I should be about 1,000 years old, but we compressed that into a very, very short period of time with an amazing team that helped me do it. And it was just a tremendous experience. And in the context of growing our own organization, our own business that helped start all of these other businesses, I came face to face with the reality that this same pattern is playing out again and again. Now, I wasn't smart enough to identify what the pattern was. I just knew it was there. And so fast forward, a number of years, my company's stuck, right? We're helping lots of people. We're doing great work. And, proud of what we're doing, but, and technically we're even growing, more people, more revenue, but our profit line shrinking every single year, and we can't figure out how to fix it. I mean, we're throwing everything at it, reading everything we can read, hiring consultants to come in, doing the whole 9 yards. And, come to find out, we're stuck in this stage called whitewater. And for us, it felt like we were doing everything wrong, even though we used to be doing everything right. Like, what's going on? We're the only ones who have this problem. That was the line, right? We're the only ones that have this problem. And come to find out, it's just a natural part of a life cycle, which come to find out there is such a thing as a life cycle. And what I found in that experience, very painful experience over probably 5 years. But I discovered a model called the predictable success model that was written by a gentleman who's now my colleague and a dear friend, Les McEwen. And he actually saw the same pattern, and he started naming the different stages that folks go through. And when you start to hear about it, and hopefully a moment to share it briefly, I mean, I can talk about this for days, so rein me in. But when you start to identify that there are these different stages that we all go through, it starts to explain what is like the insanity of growing a business, right? Because there's so many things about business that one day feel like they make sense, and the very next day it's like, I don't know anything, right?
Right.
We were in one of those stages, those I don't know anything stages, even though we're a highly successful, nearly $10 million business, and couldn't figure out what was going wrong. But fortunately, Les had figured it out and also had the key to unlocking each of the next stages. And what I discovered through that process is that for each stage, for us in particular, it was stage 3, but the same thing in the early stages for a lot of folks who are listening. It's not about doing the right thing, although that's a huge piece of the puzzle. It's about doing the right things in the right order.
Yeah.
And we had done a lot of the right stuff. That's why we were successful, but we didn't realize how the game around us was changing. And so we started trying to do things in the wrong order, and it wasn't working.
Gotcha. So these life cycles, there's a particular order that you need to follow or that you're in to get to that success level. Am I following right on that?
That's exactly right. So let's walk through them very, very quickly, right?
For sure.
So every business, every nonprofit, every consulting company, every B2B, B2C, your local soccer club, any group of two or more, right? I did a podcast on these stages for a marriage, right? Any single group of two or more goes through these 7 stages over time. So the very first stage is early struggle. In the business world, we're trying to get the thing off the ground. It's the rocket sitting on the launch pad. Engines are firing and it's just shaking, right? Like there's smoke and flames and noise and it's just kind of shaking on the launch pad. It's not moved yet. That's early struggle, for the folks who are there. I assume a lot of them are still in this stage because they're looking for resources like yours to help out. And when you're in early struggle, you've got the entrepreneur's smile. You've seen this, right? How's the business going? And you kind of like, it's great, and then you close the door behind you and you go find a sharp corner and you just start banging your head on it. That's pretty much what it's like. And we've glorified entrepreneurism, but the reality of it is being a startup is being in early struggle. And so one of the things we say that's not very popular, but very true is the best startup strategy is to stop being one, right? And you do that by having a ruthless focus on sales and marketing, which is why I love the work that you're doing. We're going to hopefully talk about this a little bit later, but you don't do it by doing a lot of other things.
Right.
There's all kinds of should do's in the early that stuff. There's a time for that. We'll talk about that later. What you really have to do is get really good. The language we use is finding a profitable, sustainable market. You got to find people who are willing to pay enough for what you do for you to have money left over. Very simple, stunningly simple. Very difficult to do, right? And a huge part of why it's difficult to do is because we lose our focus, right? We take our eye off of that one prize. We try and create the best product in the world. We try and create even the best marketing in the world. We try and do a lot of things that are not a direct line to selling. And when we do, we dramatically increase the chances that we'll fail. But if we do keep the focus, we find the profitable, sustainable market before cash runs out, right? It's a race against time. It really is.
Right.
It's just like the rocket on the launch pad and it starts lifting off, and it's slow at first, doesn't really feel like it. It's not like this hard line of all of a sudden, everything's better. But what happens is that thing starts getting up off the launch pad and it's rising. It goes faster and faster and faster. All the rockets pointing in one direction and boom, we're off to the races. And that's where the business goes into the second stage we call fun, right? Very technical term. You're going to have to write it down because you won't remember, right?
Right.
But no, it's fun because it's fun. It's not early struggle anymore.
Yeah.
We are stealing victory from the jaws of defeat. We are righteously exhausted at the end of every day. And every week we get up and we just do it all over again. And it's just as much energy. It's an enormous amount of energy, but it's exhilarating because it's working. Right? This thing is working. And so we stay focused on what we do well. We bring some people, we go from one customer to 10 to 100 to 200, whatever that is. We go from, one employee to 10 to 100. We go and, each metric across the business is going up and to the right. Some organizations are hitting 200% growth, 300% growth, 1,000% growth. These stunning numbers. Now, it looks really good as a percentage, but if you look at it, they started, market share at the beginning of fun is about 2% of the square root of squat, right? It's not a whole lot.
Yeah.
And so these are relatively small numbers when you look at the absolute values, but for the folks inside the organization, you're just taking ground and taking names, and it's awesome. And then it isn't, right? Something happens. So over the course of fun, what's happening behind the scenes that nobody talks about, you don't really even see, especially for quite a while, is as there's more and more and more of everything, right? Fun is growth by addition. We say yes, and we make it happen. Well, it starts getting more and more complicated. It's a lot harder to manage 15 people or 150 people than it is one, right? It's a lot harder to work with 9 clients at the same time instead of one. When these numbers are different for every industry, but suffice it to say, when the numbers go up, so does the complexity. And so the hard charging, take hell with a water pistol, like come all hands on deck all the time. It's like 6-year-olds playing soccer. That's basically how we lead in fun. it's just a swarm of people running all over the place. That's what it is, and that's what it's supposed to be, and that's why it's fun. But that fun has an expiration date. If we're going to keep growing, what happens is the game around us changes. And that's where we fall into that third stage. And it's another one of the not good feeling stages called whitewater. And whitewater is the problem of second stage growth. So if we take our rocket analogy and extend it kind of one stage further here, if you listen to rocket launches really closely, you'll hear them talk about this now. But the place in the kind of course of a launch that is the riskiest, right? It's where there's the most pressure, it's the most intense, seems like it should be when it's getting off the launch pad, right?
Right.
It's using something like 90% of its fuel during that time. But in fact, the hardest time is a stage called max Q.
Okay.
And max Q is just before it breaks free of the atmosphere, but it's hurtling faster and faster and faster. And so the intensity of gravity and air resistance and heat, all of these forces are pushing against you. That's where the rocket is most likely, if it doesn't have integrity, it's where it's most likely to fail. That's whitewater.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
It's that place where all of our success has created a pressure and an intensity inside our organization, more even so than outside, right? Because revenue can still be going up. It can look beautiful from the outside, but inside we feel like we've just totally lost our way. And what has to happen, you have to overcome complexity with systems and processes. To boil it down, that's fundamentally what it's about. Now, it's not just systems and processes at the front line. You'll have some of those. You have enough to stay out of jail and to make sure you at least do a decent job for your customers. We're talking about systematizing and processing the way you make decisions as a leadership team.
Okay.
And when you do that, that's what brings us to the fourth stage, predictable success. And predictable success is different from fun in that you're no longer just growing by addition, you can grow by multiplication, right? That's where you may not have 1,000% growth, but you may have 1,000 times more growth than you had back in fun, right? Because we're working with much bigger numbers now. An example I like to use is, fun is kind of like you've got a field and you're either making the field bigger or you're getting each acre of the field to produce more. Predictable success is about buying as many fields as you can get your hands on and increasing the yield of every field while you do it. Like it's that, right? That's scaling an organization. It's not just fast growth, but it's the ability to really multiply your growth. And you do that through that balance of the system and process and all the ingenuity and creativity that you use to get to where you are today. It's a beautiful thing. But what happens to organizations in predictable success, especially if you've been there for a while, well, what got you out of that last trouble stage? Whitewater. So as you bump into more challenges, which, it's not challenge free, you start to think, well, what's the system? What's the process for dealing with that? And if you're not careful, you go too far and the organization becomes over-processed. And when you become over-processed, you move into the fifth stage that we call treadmill. Right. Okay. You just you're doing the thing, you're just kind of spinning, but you're not going anywhere. Right. You move from kind of like, growing to like, how can we squeeze the last little bit of market share out? Or, what's the next checklist that we need? And the organization's at risk for becoming one of those bureaucratic organizations that we set out to beat all those years ago. And if you can catch it, which you can catch it, in treadmill, it's a very important stage because you can say, hey, we've gone too far. We got to pull back, right? There is a little bit of mess that's necessary at any given point in time. Proverb says, where there's no cow, the trough is clean, right? But there much comes by the work of the ox, right? It's just leading an organization is inherently messy to some degree. And if we try and eliminate all the mess, we eliminate all the potential as well.
True.
And that's what's at risk in treadmill. And if we're not careful, if we don't pull it back, if we don't ease up on some of the system and process, if we don't, start pursuing some new, maybe riskier ideas, then the organization falls into the penultimate stage, which we call the big rut. And the difference between the big rut and treadmill is that you don't recognize something is wrong anymore. It feels like we've finally figured it out. You ask a team in the big rut and they're going to say, yeah, we're in predictable success. We finally got rid of all those mess makers, right? And we know what we're doing. But you end up with the DMV, right? You end up with, I've been traveling a lot lately. You know, you have these massive airlines. And I remember there's a scene, I think it's from Meet the Fockers, but he's standing at the gate. He's the only one there, right? There's not a soul around. And she's like, you know, rows, 1 to 10, and he's row 11, and he goes up and she looks at it and she gives it right back to him and she's like, please wait your turn, sir. It's that kind of a thing, right? And we have lots of fun with it. But the reality of it is that's the existence for a lot of organizations. And it's just a long, slow slide into irrelevance. And that slide ends in death rattle. And death rattle is, there's some spark at the end to try and get everything to work again. But ultimately, it's too little, too late, and the organization is done. And the kind of moral of the story is, one, we're all going through this process. So at any given point in time, you're not off the map, right? You're somewhere on the map. And that's, I remember one time I got lost in a mall. You remember malls, right?
Right.
I'm old enough to know what a mall is. We'll put it that way. And so in the malls, for the millennials here, you don't know what I'm talking about, but you'd walk in and there's a map right near the entrance on one of the big pillars that kind of tells you where you're at. And so I'm a little kid, 6, 7 years old, and I get lost in a mall. And I still remember the relief that I had when I found one of those maps and it said, you are here.
Yeah.
That's what it's like when you're in one of those difficult stages to know, hey, it's just difficult because it's difficult, right? It's not because you're necessarily doing something wrong. It's just that's the stage of business that you're in. And you don't have to stay there, right? There's something that you can do to get out. And so when I'm working with clients in any stage, the very first thing that we have to do is say, what stage are you in? Right? Because if you're in early struggle, like a lot of your folks may be, or fun, and you hear all this stuff about systems and automation and process and everything, some of that's great, right? Some of that's really good, but you got to be careful with it because you can just, if you automate something that's not working, right? Like you've just not got there yet. The systems and process and automation, all of that works when the thing's working, right? So those are things that typically work much better in late fun, whitewater, predictable success. You've got to be conscious of which strategies you're using and whether or not they're right for your stage.
You love listening to podcasts, but have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? Maybe you want to build a brand, grow your business, or are looking for an excuse to talk about your favorite hobby. Whatever your reason for making a podcast, Buzzsprout is the place to start. Since 2009, Buzzsprout has helped over 300,000 people launch their own podcasts. Buzzsprout walks you step by step through the whole process and will give you powerful tools to start, grow, and monetize your podcast. Ready to get started? Click the link in the show notes to get our free step-by-step guide to starting your podcast today.
Gotcha. And that's a good obvious point is to know where we're at, right? And I think sometimes, are we ever going to get out of the stage where are we ever going to get to the fun or the whitewater? And with it, I'm curious. So say, maybe we're in fun. Maybe we finally made it to that. Maybe we're in whitewater. So what's a good strategy so we don't get to the death rattle?
What's the strategy?
How do we can we stay out of the death rattle, or is it just inevitable for everyone?
That's great. Yeah. So it's a great question. The way that you stay out of death rattle is to pay attention to treadmill.
Okay.
Because if you wait for the big route, it's too late.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the best way that you do it is that you implement systems and processes so long as those are bringing balance to the creativity and initiative in the organization. But you keep a very close eye out. And this is typically larger organizations. It can happen in smaller ones as well. We can talk about that a little bit later. But if you're up over 100, 150 people, you are on treadmill watch all the time. Right. I was just talking to my dad on the phone yesterday, and all of a sudden he said, "Oh, I got a tornado watch or a tornado warning." Right. I've got to get down in the basement, which is not common for the Pennsylvania where he's at. Yeah. But that's basically what it's like. You are constantly under a tornado warning. If you're up over 150 people, you're constantly on a tornado warning. Like you've got to pay attention to treadmill because it's so easy to let it slip. So that's the best answer for how you stay out of death rattle. Now, on the other side, you've got an equal but opposite extreme, which is How do you get out of early struggle and stay out of early struggle?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is, you do that again. I mentioned this at the beginning, but you do it with that ruthless focus on your profitable, sustainable market,
Mm-hmm.
an intense, unrelenting focus on selling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause I think a lot of people, like you said, there's so much like things you should do, or, things that they're the shiny object type thing. And people want to implement all these things, especially early on, because I think that they'll be like that golden ticket to success when, we need to focus on profit. I just interviewed Rocky Lavalny, who's, profit comes first and everything like that. And that, like, you've got to have the profit so you can be able to get to the fun and get to that predictable success. And it comes down to, are you selling your thing?
Yeah.
Your product
Absolutely.
or service. And that should be the main
and are
focus.
you selling enough of it, to replace cash before cash runs out? We tend to jump into a new business like, we'll be profitable in 3 months. And it's 3 years, like this is a 2 to 5 year process for most people. If you're in early struggle, you're listening right now, and it's tough. I feel for you. And you've been there for a couple of years and you're like, I don't know if I have what it takes. The fact that you've been in early struggle for 2 years is no indication of whether or not you have what it takes. Right now, you might not, right? And if that's the case, you want to get out as soon as you can, but you're gonna spend time in early struggle. Everybody does. It's a very rare story, and it's usually a lie if folks say that they went from zero to a ton. We'll say that right off the bat. It's just It's not normal. Most of us, vast majority of those who make it, make it by having the resilience to fight through what is a almost constant discouragement, right? There's a lot of bad news in early struggle. And I remember Jerry Seinfeld was talking about what it took to become a great comedian. And he said he's just amazed by comedians, not because of how funny they are, but because of how long they had to crawl on their face to get to that point, right? It's just the price that you pay to succeed. And it's not fun to be in it. That's the fun stage. Yeah. But just because you're in it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. So don't beat yourself up on it. But what you can do to increase your chances of success is to just have that hyper focus on selling. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like, just trying to figure out where I am in my journey even now. It's like, okay, where am I actually at? After you went to those life stages, like, I feel like I'm not in the early struggle. Maybe I'm still in the fun, but like I feel like it's still difficult to even see, looking at what we've done with Elevate, like, where are we at? And how do we, make sure we're in the right trajectory and doing the right thing. So I think it's a simple model, but you still got to take that step back and kind of really, take heed of what's going on, so you don't miss. Maybe you are on treadmill, and you need to rethink some things. So it's definitely an eye opener with that. So where do we go if we find we're in, maybe whitewater? What are some practical things we can do to get going from there?
Yeah, it's important to rewind. So if you're in whitewater, you got to remember, how did we get here?
Yeah.
We got here by keeping system and process to a minimum, right?
Yep.
So we can try a lot of things and execute on a lot of things, and it's all hands on deck all the time, right? When we were leading through what I now know is the fun stage, I didn't know it at the time. Every time we'd hire someone, I'd go in and tell them, I'd say, hey, we don't have all our ducks in a row. If you're looking for a place that has all your ducks in a row, go somewhere else, because you'll be miserable here. But if you don't mind, when you find a stray duck, just kind of putting them where they're supposed to be, you're going to have a blast here, right? So it's just, you embrace that inherent messiness, and that's just how you succeed, and that can last up to, anywhere from, 15 employees. You might hit whitewater pretty early, but a lot of times it's around 45 employees that you really hit whitewater for the first time in a real sense.
Okay.
Not to say that there aren't things to learn from each of the lessons, but that's where the complexity really starts to overcome our ability to lead by ourselves. So that's how you got there. Now, what that means is you are under-processed as an organization. Okay. You've not needed the process, so you got to a point where you're under-processed. Now, there is a visceral fear in leaders who are in whitewater of being over-processed, right? Like they abandoned that ship a long time ago. That's why they started their company. Those big bureaucratic machines are who they've been beating for the last 5, 10, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so we create this false choice in Whitewater of, can we be an entrepreneurial organization that we've always been, or do we have to be this big bureaucratic monolithic mess? The reality of it is predictable success is the happy middle, right? But it's not a place that's like a balance of the two. It's actually holding on to both worlds in tension.
Okay.
And so the way that you do that, if you're in Whitewaters, you've got to add more system and process. And again, it's primarily to your decision making. So I mentioned at the beginning, we were in Whitewater, we were doing the right things, but we weren't doing them in the right order, right? So just to talk about that quickly, there's a right order to getting out of Whitewater, as stepping stones across the river. You can't just jump to stone 5, right? Like you're going to get wet. That's what's going to happen. So step 1 is not what anybody thinks step 1 is. And step 1 is, we call it the org chart. Now, it's not just a flow chart with a bunch of names on it, right? It's not the piece of paper. Who cares about that? That's a part of the process. It's a tool for clarity. But what we're really talking about with the org chart is building a machine for decision making.
Okay.
Does everybody in the organization know where they fit in the organization and what their contribution to the organization is, right? Mm-hmm. So that they can make decisions either as a team or as individuals that contribute to the clarity and success of the organization as a whole.
Gotcha.
Because remember, before that, it's all hands on deck all the time. We may have an org chart, but I used to tell folks, hey, your job description, tear it up, right? It was useful for the hiring process. It's irrelevant now, right? And so you probably have those things, but are they real? In fun, they don't need to be real, quite honestly. They're there to create a little bit of clarity, and they're there for marketing purposes, right? That's about as much as you need job titles in fun. In Whitewater, it's not all about being a company that's all about titles and hierarchy, but it's about using titles to create structure for clarity. So the org chart, step number 1, you got to get that fixed because folks need to know where they are and what's expected of them. The next step is the leadership team. So as you start defining this, we've got to really dial in on the leadership team as a whole. In fun, leaders are the first followers, right? They're the ones who is, hey, we need to get this done. They're the first one to take the step to get it done, right? Yep. That's your role as a leader in fun. It's whatever the CEO decides, be the first one to go after it, right? And you tend to have some people reporting to you, but it's a vertical relationship, right? I do what I'm supposed to do. That changes fundamentally in Whitewater. We can't go from just we all report to the boss and do whatever he or she says. We've got to start leading laterally. It's the language that we use for it. You have to start, we call it lateral management, where you start working with other people on the same level of the org chart with you, where we start coming together to make decisions as a team or as smaller teams, as opposed to just running off and doing our own thing in our own silos.
Okay.
And so lateral management is about developing the leadership skills as a team that we need to drive that machine for decision making.
Gotcha. And I think, and I'm sure is there other steps with this? Because
yes, there's 3 more. We'll go through them quicker.
Okay.
Cross functionality, right, is the next step. And back in fun, that happens automatically. Again, because it's all hands on deck all the time. When you have a bunch of people running around, you actually have to teach them to work with different departments.
Okay.
And different people, right? And so we're actually going through and intentionally building the structures that we did intuitively in fun.
Okay. Interesting. My brain's
and then
just
the
going,
last 2 steps, just to round it out, is alignment.
Okay.
We've got to go back through, and everyone has mission, vision, values these days, and that's fine. That's the starting point, right? It's no longer enough to say, this is where we're going, and then just expect everybody to get there.
Yeah.
You've actually got to map out, these are mission, vision, and values, but here are the goals, strategies, and tactics that lead to the actions that we need to be taking at an individual level. You actually have to map the gap between the two of them.
Okay.
Right? Because between the hilltop where you want to go and the hilltop you're on right now is a big fat valley, right? And if you just expect everyone to make it across that dark valley on their own, you're going to end up with 100 people in 100 places.
Yeah.
And so by mapping out, okay, we're narrowing it down. Here's the next step. Here's the next step. Here's the next step. And that's what keeps everybody throughout the org chart in line and in sync.
Okay.
And then, and only then, this is the step that everyone tries to skip to, but it's the last step in the process. Then you empower your team. Right.
Okay.
That's when, because once we've created the structure and we've got everyone aligned in the right direction, well, now we can start granting authority, real, genuine authority to make real significant decisions, and know that with a high degree of success, those decisions are going to take us toward our goals as a team.
Okay, man.
And that's
yeah. And this is really good. Like, I'm just trying to break it down in my mind now. There's such good, structure and steps with this. So, for a lot of people listening, they're probably in early struggle. And now that I'm listening to you, I wonder if we're still in early struggle. I don't. So, because we have, a handful of their contracted employees through with Elevate. And so, like, I guess can you clarify what defines you being in early struggle versus fun for those who might.
Yeah, so that one's one of the simpler transition points, and that is profitability. Are you regularly profitable? We're looking for a quarter of sustained profitability, and we want that to carry on. Now, just because you were profitable one quarter doesn't mean you're going to be profitable for the rest of your existence, right? And so what you find is that there's a little bit of one step forward, one step back, two steps forward, one step, and you kind of play with that line for a little while. What's happening is early struggle has a gravitational pull.
Okay.
It's just like our rocket. If we shut the rocket engines off, it, straight back down.
Yeah.
And so you've got to pay attention to the fact that that there's just a continued pull. So how do we not pay attention to that? Well, one of the easiest ways we get distracted. One of the most common things I see, especially like visionary leaders who are like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, is as soon as they get out of early struggle, they get some resource behind them and they start chasing after 5 new things. Right? It's like, I finally have the time to do these things I've wanted to do for so long.
Yep.
And they've got 5 new things. Well, one of them is in fun, 4 of them are in early struggle. Right. And so it's like right back down again. We hire too many people all at once. Right. The more you hire, the more money you have to make. And so there's a balance between when do we hire and when do we fire. The general rule for that is, you want to hire on a lagging basis. Right. You want to follow sales. It's not comfortable. But it's the best way of staying out of early struggle in those early days. And the last part about it is not something that we necessarily have a time to go into in detail, but we'll point folks to some resources on it. But you've got to work what we call the visionary operator relationship. So there are some people, visionaries, big ideas, let's go. They're starters, they're risk takers. Then you have some folks who are operators who are like, I will walk through walls to get stuff done, right? Just tell me what to do and don't watch, right? That's the type. Now, they're not processors. Everything is a system and process. They're not synergists, let's all sing Kumbaya. They're both action-oriented types, right? So visionaries are highly idea-oriented. Let's go, start things. Operators are highly action-oriented finishers. So you have start, finish, and that's the rocket fuel that gets the thing off the ground. And so you want to work that combination. If you're feeling the pull back to early struggle and you've got a team of 5 to 10 people and you've been out of early struggle for a while, you want to make sure that you've got operators on the team. Folks who just naturally want to get stuff done. They're naturally inclined to go out and sell the next thing. They're naturally inclined to knock out, 5 more fulfillment orders than the next person, or whatever that is. But you got to work that combination of visionary and a team of operators.
Okay. And that's good. And that clarifies that, which, I still feel like I'm like in the middle between those two stages, but which for me, thinking of that is like, that's exciting because, I was just talking to my brother today about it was, I feel like I've been doing Elevate for like 5 to 10 years. Like, it just feels like it's been that long, but I've only been doing my entrepreneur journey for 2 years, Elevate for just 1. And to get to where we're at now, I'm super thankful and grateful and amazed. But I'm just excited, what's coming forward with it. And it's looking at it from your stages, this predictable success model it's a really interesting and eye-opening kind of way to look at it. And with what you shared about that, like you said, you help, you work with big corporations, big businesses, helping them with their strategies and everything. What though on your journey, what did you do maybe, or something that you remember that's really been a crucial step in elevating your brand, elevating what you've done?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, most of my stuff, and going back to the fact, Christian entrepreneur, my faith is a big part of my work, and I would say that I'm made for whitewater, right? Like I'm made to help people out of whitewater, and there's actually some data to prove that. But suffice it to say, that was the most impactful moment because it touched on my calling as an individual. So fundamentally, I help folks out of whitewater. That's what me and my team of coaches and consultants do. And I help other coaches who are getting people out of whitewater. That's, if you put it in a nutshell, now that everyone knows that language, that's what I do. I'm passionate about helping teams get out of whitewater. And because of that, that pivotal moment for me was really when I realized I was in whitewater and when I discovered how to do the right things in the right order coming out of it.
That's huge. And I think I think we can all kind of learn that as we go, like doing it in the right order, I think will help a lot of people. And with that, so, looking back on your journey, and this might correlate to what you just said a little bit, even so, but say and you do this, but when you're meeting with an early entrepreneur who's on their journey and you kind of see yourself in them, and you and your journey, what is something you wish you had been told early on when you're starting out that you can share with that individual?
So this is related. It happened after we were out of early struggle, but it's really helpful advice if you're in early struggle. And it was actually, again, it was my dad who was telling, I was complaining to him one day because it was hard. We were having trouble with something. And I was just kind of waffling on, is this what I want to do? Is this really worth it? I wasn't really using that language, but he knew that's what I was asking. And I stopped complaining, and he said, "Hey, you either got to shit or get off the pot. Like you got to decide that this is what you want to do." So I love Henry Cloud. He says, "You are ridiculously in charge, right? You get what you allow or create. You're ridiculously in charge." So when I'm working with folks, it's a tough time. It's a tough time. And so the best way to get through that is to choose that you want to be there. Right? Like this is just the part of the process. I choose to be here right now. If you feel like you've got to do it because it's what you have to do, or you should do it, or, your dad was an entrepreneur, so you're an entrepreneur, or whatever, like you thought it was a great idea and you realize that that's not what you want to do, either do it or get out of it. Right. Yeah. But it's gotta be burn the bridges. Let's go. Right. Like you can't live, in both worlds. You've really got to be all in. And when you look at those who make it through early struggle, there's some mechanics to that, but fundamentally they've just decided this is going to happen, and that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. And it kind of resonates with my story, and we don't have to dive into it. And some people might have heard of it. I quit my job in 2020 right before pandemic picked up here in Indiana, on faith, because I'm the same as you with my faith and stuff, and just felt called to do it and had no idea what I was doing or what I would do. And really just put all my trust in that, and God showed up. And I keep telling my wife I need to write a book just about how he showed up on the process. But and it was the same thing. I read The Last Arrow, and it's a book about a guy who fought cancer basically, and all that. And he tells a story about the general. I think it was the Spartan general, and I can't remember now 100%, but or I can't remember. Anyways, they go to this island and they're outnumbered, and he says, burn the boats, because we're either going to win or we're going to die. There's no retreat. And so they burnt the boats, and they ended up being victorious because they had no other option. They were going to win or die. And that's kind of like how I felt. Like I'm burning these ships, and we're going to survive, or whatever comes. And so I think it's a good point. Is you've got to make the choice. You can't just be on the sideline.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you, Scott. Thank you so much for being on here, sharing all this great, valuable direction for individuals who are starting their entrepreneurial journey, and just being open to giving that advice. We appreciate that. Where can people, though, connect with you, learn more from you, and maybe get your help in the future?
Yeah. So one more reference to my dad, just for good measure. I'm a junior, so I can't answer this question and say just go find Scott Ritzheimer, because as weird a name as that is, I'm not the only one. So I'm on all the social media platforms except for TikTok, but you can find me on all of those. You can head over to scalearchitects.com. www.scalearchitects.com. There's just a mountain of resources there. We've got several hundred videos for the DIYer. We've got a couple of assessments. If you're listening to it saying, hey, what stage am I in? We've got a free assessment that you can use to identify what stage you're in. It's right there on the homepage. If you're wondering what your leadership style is, are you a visionary, are you an operator? There's an assessment for that that's free. It's on that page. So there's just an enormous amount of resource there. It's the best place to go for all of it. And, there's different folks finding this in different places. So we've structured it so there's something for everybody there. It's a terrible marketing strategy, but it's something that we've felt led to do. And it's part of the deal when you're working with all 7 stages. But so scalearchitects.com is absolutely the best place to get started. There's a way to contact us there as well. Anything that you need, you'll find it there.
Awesome. Yeah, guys. So check that out. I definitely will be going to take those free resources to figure out leadership style even more and what stage elevates at, because now I'm curious. And so, but again, no, Scott, thank you so much for being on Elevate Your Brand today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, Chris. Thanks.
Thank you. And guys, if you're listening to this live, if you're watching the replay and you got anything from it, make sure you hit the like button down there on YouTube, share it with somebody else that it can impact and make a difference in, because we can reach more people together by doing that. And then make sure you go subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, so we can continue to get some great guests and information out to you, and so you don't miss out. But until next time, go out there and elevate. And thanks so much for tuning into this episode today. If you found value at all from this episode, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It just helps us get this show, these messages out in front of more people. And don't forget to share this with someone who you think could benefit from listening to as well.